Well, I think the next 2, 3 months are going to be very challenging. But at the end of the day, Russia's logistics system only gets weaker, whereas Ukraine's capabilities continue to get better. I just have a sense that things are going to look a lot different and a lot better by the end of spring and summer. The Russians, from the beginning, overestimated their own ability. They underestimated Ukraine's resolve, and they also miscalculated the willingness of the West to stick together to support Ukraine. So because of that, they entered this, of course, the war started in 2014, but the special military operation, which began February last year, they entered that without having properly developed the logistical infrastructure, without adequate troops, without adequate resources, and without a proper coherent command structure or operational design. I mean, so they've been trying to recover from the original failures and poor design ever since, as they go. And so, the way they do that, of course, is by pouring in poorly trained, poorly equipped, and poorly led conscripts and mobilized troops into the meat grinder in order to try and at least stabilize and buy some time. That was not the original plan, obviously, but because the original plan was so poorly designed, they've had to use human bodies to buy time. And also, of course, their strategic bombing effort of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure is also part of this to buy enough time for them to recover. I think that on the Ukrainian side, of course, I know that these soldiers have to be exhausted. This has been going on, the constant pounding, the casualties. But the difference is Ukraine is defending their homeland. I don't think you'd find too many Russian soldiers that actually want to be in Ukraine. But the Ukrainians are defending their home, their families. And they've got 50 nations supporting them. The contact group is meeting again today. Is everything being delivered as fast as we would all want? Of course not. But nonetheless, 50 nations, and nobody is supporting Russia except Iran. So I think I'm actually optimistic. I think if we stick together, if the West sticks together, we could see Crimea, the decisive part of this campaign, being liberated this year. I've been impressed with the Ukrainian general staff. They have been disciplined. They have demonstrated a real understanding and professional ability in what we call operational art, the design of a campaign. They understand their adversary. They understand their own capabilities. And so I think the general staff, if they have to do things to adjust the lines to preserve, that they will make the right decisions. They've been making the right decisions all along. And I have a lot of confidence in what they are trying to do. In terms of capabilities that Ukraine needs, I think that the West is by and large providing much of that, but not all of that, and not as fast as it should be. It took too long to get to the decision to provide the Leopards, for example. Fortunately, they'll get there. Probably within the next 2 to 3 months, we'll see a lot of Leopards with trained Ukrainian crews, enough to create at least 2 or 3 battalions. So a full armored brigade with Leopard, plus Marder, plus Bradley, plus AMX, and all these others. And then the self-propelled artillery that's being provided by several nations. These will make a difference. The need for an armored force that could penetrate Russian defenses to sever the so-called land bridge. I think that's what I would want to see, and I imagine that, I don't know this, of course, but I imagine the general staff is thinking along those lines, perhaps. The most important capability, it seems to me, that would make the biggest difference would be long-range precision weapons. Secure, General Cavoli says precision can defeat mass. And I agree with him. Mass infantry requires mass artillery, and mass artillery requires headquarters, ammunition, and transportation. So with long-range precision weapons, longer range than even the GMLRS that are fired from HIMARS today, can hit Russian headquarters, can hit ammunition storage, and can destroy railroads and bridges that are necessary to move that ammunition. So if you knock out those three components, then it almost doesn't matter how much infantry that the Russians put out there. So that those capabilities, and then of course those are the exact capabilities also needed to isolate and liberate Crimea. And of course the Russians would want Ukraine to be diverting capability up there away from other places. So that would be a professional approach on the Russian side to try and distract or dilute Ukraine's ability. That's what you always want to do, is to force your opponent, your adversary, to move forces away from your most important point. So I would not be surprised if Russia was doing that, or if they at least were giving indications that they were doing that. And so the General Staff, of course, has to be prepared for that possibility. But part of the professional operational level of war means being willing to accept risk, even accept some losses in certain areas, so that you focus on what is the most important area. And that requires nerves of steel, it requires discipline, and it requires soldiers who understand what's going on. That sometimes your unit, my unit in Iraq, at times we had what was called economy of force because we needed to do something because the main effort was happening somewhere else. And so my higher headquarters took risk with our force in order to make sure that the main effort, the most important task, could be accomplished. This is the nature of warfare. This is the nature of operational level of war. And I think the General Staff has demonstrated time and again that they understand that. You don't take every new person and every new thing and just push it into the fight unless it's at the most important place. And of course, we want to see Ukraine completely restore its sovereign territory. That includes Crimea, of course, as well as all of Donbass. This is so important for the West. It's so important for all of us, not only Ukraine. And I believe that the government in Kyiv understands, and probably most Ukrainians understand, that taking back Crimea, this is not just emotional symbolism. This is about the security and stability of Ukraine. As long as Russia sits in Crimea, they will always have the ability to launch the next attack after the West loses interest or after we think it's over. You know, that's why the idea of a peace settlement where Russia is allowed to retain Ukraine is nonsense. It's dangerous. As long as the Black Sea Fleet operates from Sevastopol, as long as the Russian Air Force can fly and launch missiles from Crimea, as long as the Russians have logistics and the headquarters in Crimea, Ukraine will never, ever be stable.